There are many other different attack vectors an attacker can use to exploit the vulnerabilities we may have in our software. And since the OWASP list is top 10, or in this case 12, let's cover some of the ones that did not make it into the list. Buffer overflows we have talked about before, and it happens when a program is writing to memory and it overruns the buffer's boundaries and writes to the adjacent memory. And they can do that if our programmers have failed to perform the proper boundary checks. And the buffer really just is an area of memory we've set aside to hold certain data while we move from one section of a program to another or between programs. And one of the ways that the buffer overflows can be triggered is if we have malformed input. Meaning the input we expected was of a certain size, but what we actually got is much bigger. The memory will then flow over into other memory sections where they might overwrite other data, which could give us memory access errors, wrong results on searches or queries, or it could just cause the system to crash. And that might not sound super horrible, but a well-designed buffer overflow attack makes it possible for the attacker to replace certain executable code with their malicious code. Since our system goes to that sector every time it needs to call that executable, it will now call the malicious code. Let's cover a few more before we move on to the next chapter. Race conditions or race hazards is when two or more programs try to access or modify a file at the same time. And this can be an attacker who through altering the files either can cause data corruption or privilege escalation. And as part of that, we should also look at TOC2, or time of check, time of use. And it's a bug where we make changes to a system. Let's say I have access to an Excel file that have our financial information. I'm a regular user. I access the file. At that point, my security credentials are checked. I have access to the file, but I don't make any changes. Half an hour later, an administrator locks the file because they need to do an end-of-year report. They look at the spreadsheet, everything looks good, but since my security check has already passed, I can make changes to the files after they locked it, and they'll still be committed. And we just talked about privilege escalation. This is something the attacker tries to get in many attacks. And we're going to be covering penetration testing and the privilege escalation phase more in depth in Domain 4. We'll come into the system as a regular user, maybe not even an internal user. Then we escalate our privileges to, let's say, a regular user. And then we try to escalate our privileges, and we keep doing that until we have administrator access. And we might have to do this on multiple platforms. Maybe we have admin access on the networking side, but we have regular access or no access to a certain server that houses the data. And that is why when we do pen testing, it is that iterative process that repeats itself over and over, and the further along we get, the more access we have, the more damage we can do. I have worked a couple of places where after an attack, they determined nothing was stolen, nothing they shouldn't have had access to was accessed. Pretty much, they just came in and looked around, and they were just going to ignore it. No. There is no reason for someone to break into your house and just look around. They're there for a reason. And even if they don't steal any of your stuff, what were they there for? What was the purpose? In many of these cases, the purpose was to install a backdoor, which allows the attacker to access our systems whenever they want. Or they could just have automated the system to send the data that they want from us every so often. Because having a backdoor installed, they can completely avoid all the normal security checks and authentications we would have for anyone else. Some backdoors could also have been left by programmers, either intentionally or they just forgot about it. Same with maintenance hooks. Once the software is done being developed, we have the final product, we need to remove all backdoors and all maintenance hooks that we have used to make our work easier. Because you can be pretty sure the attacker are going to find them. And we have talked about disclosure before. This is when we covered the white hat, gray hat, and black hat hackers. But I figured this part at least would make sense to have in this section too. So if you find a software bug that could be exploited, you can choose full disclosure. That means you tell everybody about it. You make it public, you assume the attackers already know about it and are actively using it, and you kind of want to push the company that owns the software into making a patch for it. On the other hand, if the attackers didn't know about it, they definitely do now. That aligns with a white hat hacker. Responsible or partial disclosure is you discover the vulnerability, then you tell the vendor about it, and then they have a certain amount of time to find a patch for it, fixing the problem. Gray hat hacker, right? And if you have told them and for months they haven't done anything and they're not working on it, well, then you can go with a full disclosure, forcing the hand. And then finally, no disclosure. You don't tell anyone about it, you just keep exploiting that all you can to do whatever your goal is. Black hat.